specifics and is almost impossible to meet until details are worked out. Given other operational demands faced by our CMP, OPP, and other police services, there's a requirement to understand the specific resources needed and the objectives the OPS is trying to achieve prior to providing those resources.
Correct.
So this is the information that you would have been receiving from Commissioner Lucky in the RCMP?
Yep, presumably, yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is a request that is going to both levels of government, right? And I think both of, both the RCMP and the OPP would be asking themselves the same questions, right? Like, what's the order of magnitude of the people that you need? And what is the plan that you're putting those people against, right? Because I remember that quite distinctly at a number of occasions. The commissioner making that clear is that it isn't just about the number of people, it's what are the duties, like what is the capabilities that you need, what will you be asking them to do, and you need fidelity on that plan, both for their safety and to make sure that you have enough individuals to be able to prosecute on that. And I remember when this came in, right, it was a big ask, and it was a big ask for a lot of different kinds of needs and services, like including everything from media relations help and things like that. Like, we were asking ourselves, okay, could we do a call out and, find individuals within the federal public service to lend them? Like, is there a way we can help? Like, that was really the way everybody was thinking at this point in time, is like, all hands on deck, how do we help get this done, kind of thing.
Okay, so I think that some of those concerns are reflected. If we just scroll down the document a bit, and then we get to strategic enforcement options, scroll down to the next page, and you can take us through what's being expressed here. I believe this is what you were referring to when you were saying that.
Yeah, this is a short form kind of articulation of what you heard from Deputy Minister Keenan a little bit earlier in the week about the strategic enforcement strategy. Is how do we, show that there are consequences, or economic consequences or other consequences, both through the police and law enforcement, but also is there a way to work with provincial transportation authorities and looking at, for example, the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, and these are commercial vehicles that are registered either in the province or Ontario or other provinces. Is there a way that we could work with provincial transportation authorities to try to resolve the issue?
And this is being cobbled together, this document, not cobbled, but put together on February 9th, which, as we know from Deputy Minister Keenan, is the day after he received a letter from Ontario Ministry of Transportation, which I think he characterized, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's a polite thanks, but no thanks.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we just keep scrolling down a bit here now, we get to border-related enforcement options. So I think this probably refers to what you were telling us about CBSA dealing with no less. It's helpful to be walked through that. And as we know, that proposal was eventually brought, to the IRG on February 12th, and it was decided there not to pursue the engagement strategy.
The way Deputy Minister Stewart put that was that it wasn't taken up. The way I put that in our witness summary was it didn't proceed. I think that's the best characterization.
Fair enough. It didn't proceed. It didn't go anywhere from there, put it that way. And I believe in your witness summary, you described it as overtaken by events.
Correct. I think that I probably shouldn't have used that expression because it's a bit of an idiom, but that comes from a previous stage of my career. But the discussion around engagement was essentially rendered moot by the events of the next couple of days, including the IRG and the cabinet meeting, and then eventually the invocation of the act.
And maybe, the sort of what happened in Windsor, right? The Ontario government had attempted to do that, and it wasn't fruitful. So I think that would also be one of the considerations.
Fair enough. Sorry, Mr. Hutchison, were you going to add something on that?
No, I was done. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and I believe when we were discussing this with Deputy Minister Stewart the other day, we were discussing those different branches of attempts at engagement in Windsor.
That would be an option, yes. Either the Emergency Act or special purpose emergency legislation, right? Like, there's a couple of different ways you could do that. Yeah.
Okay. And so those things were discussed at that meeting on the morning of February the 9th.
Yeah, to a certain extent, yeah.
Okay. And then they were certainly on the table when the incident response group met on February 10th. Isn't that correct?
Yep, the record will show that. If you look at the tracker that is attached to the minutes of the incident response group meeting on the 12th of February, the document that's appended there shows the things that we were working on, as you say, in track 1, which is within existing authorities, and track 2, what if track 1 isn't successful or the situation escalates quickly and we need to be in a position to do something different.
I won't call it up, but I believe that the minutes of the incident response group meeting from February 10th also refer to a discussion of those track 2 items. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, so but I guess what I was trying to, you're absolutely right. The minutes do refer to that. They refer to a discussion of, the action that could be taken within existing authority, and then what might be the process of invoking the Emergency Act. That was the second part of the conversation.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Bogdan, you said this morning something along the lines of a good civil servant does their homework in advance. Did I have that correct?
Yeah, probably something like that. Yep.
Okay. So do I take it that officials within the Privy Council office would have been at least looking at the Emergencies Act as a potential option, or scoping out the potential for using the Emergencies Act by that first week of February?
Not the first week of February, no. We were not there yet, no.
Okay, so when we look at the minutes of the SSE committee meeting on February 3rd, and it talked about creative options, was that referring to the Emergencies Act, or was that referring to something else?
That's referring to something else. Do you recall when Commission Council put up the document that was circulated for the SSE meeting on February 3rd? It's like a placemat, and there's a whole range of options. In the right column, it was creative options. So things like le grand débat and things like that. That's what that refers to.
Okay, so when would the Privy Council office have started to do its homework on the Emergencies Act? When would you or somebody in your office have first started to look at it as a potential option?
It would have probably been on or around the 9th.
Okay, so it would have been only a day before the first meeting of the incident response group when it was being discussed there.
Yep, I think
And
that's
no
right.
no work was done on the Emergencies Act before that.
So I can't say that definitively. Work would have been being done by a lot of different people on an anticipatory basis that, making sure, as I said, that we've done our homework and we would be in a position to answer questions, right? Like if the government turned to the public servants and said, what's involved with invocation of the act? You need to be able to answer all kinds of first order questions, right? Everything from the threshold that's to be met to what's the parliamentary process, what kinds of considerations do you want to be thinking about? So I can't say definitively who was working on what. I wasn't directing that work. So I'm not being evasive. I'm just trying to understand it was all hands on deck at that point, and I can't speak to every part of the public service.
Do you know if that work was being done within the Privy Council, or was it in within the Privy Council office, or was it in a different department?
I can't say definitively. I know there was work being done in the Privy Council office. As to how other departments would have been implicated, I can't speak to that.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are all of my questions.
Okay.
So now I'll just ask you again to walk us through the chronology of the 13th of February.
Okay, the chronology of the 13th. So there was a lot going.
It was a Sunday.
It was a Sunday, that's right. Also, day 17, at the end of the third weekend. I think you've heard testimony from other colleagues and others about kind of what was going on in terms of the protests, what was happening we had all been, when we weren't working and on calls, we'd been watching the law enforcement action that had been taking place in Windsor, for example. We were watching what was happening in Ottawa on our television screens, but there were calls and meetings that took place that day, which are the focus, I believe, of your question. I don't recall myself participating in a DMOC that day. I may have, I just can't remember, to be honest with you. My focus was really on getting ready for the IRG meeting. At that point, just given the escalation that had taken place, the fact that we were coming to the end of the third weekend. I think the IRG was in the afternoon on the 13th, if I recall correctly. So we were getting ready for that, making sure the materials were ready and so on, collecting up all of the latest inputs. We were at the end of the third weekend. Ottawa was still a significant site of what I think was generally considered at that point to be an illegal protest. Make no mistake, there were people who were there for a lawful protest, but at that point, the totality of the situation in Ottawa was an illegal protest, an illegal blockade. And what was going on in Windsor, and we saw the size of the effort that was required to bring Windsor under control and the duration of the effort that was required. That took days to de-escalate and to eliminate, to get to a point where that situation was settled and the port of entry was able to open, but we didn't know how long that was going to be sustained. So all to say, it was a serious set of circumstances. Other ports of entry were kind of on and off. The situation was quite volatile. So at any point in time, there were lots of different inputs. We went into the incident response group in the afternoon of the 13th of February, and through conversations that we had internally, the proposed agenda for the IRG was a bit different than it was on the 10th or the 12th. And if you look carefully at it, you'll see that we have switched the order of items. The first item is not what you would normally expect as a situational overview and update. Ministers and the Prime Minister had been meeting on the 12th, they'd been meeting on the 10th, they'd been getting this constant feed of information. So the advice of the Prime Minister was to turn at that point immediately to, given we were at the end of the third weekend, we still had a very challenging and I believe the conclusions we had were a dangerous situation, complex, volatile situation. What were the options? What were the decisions available to ministers? And then after a long series of deliberations, then there was is there anything new to add? And so an upside down flip of the traditional agenda. The conclusion coming out of that incident response group was the Prime Minister was convening the cabinet on the evening of the 13th of February, a virtual cabinet call. Luckily, we had that secure video capacity to do that, to consult with his cabinet on the overall response. And at that point,
The idea was to make sure that we interpret, avec les adaptations nécessaires, the incorporation by reference. So the idea here, and as I said before, is really to interpret within the context, the purpose, also the decision maker that have to look at similar words.
Okay. And to your knowledge, from what you know, what do you know about Parliament's intention for a threat to the security of Canada in the Emergencies Act to mean something different from a threat to the security of Canada as defined in the CSIS Act?
I guess what I'm saying here is when the legislator adopted the Emergency Act versus when the legislator adopted CSIS Act, it was for different purposes. The purpose of doing an investigation under the CSIS Act is not the same purpose as triggering or invoking the Emergency Act for public order emergency.
And I understand. But you are aware that both the CSIS Act as well as the Emergencies Act were passed within just a few years of one another in the 80s.
Well, I'm pleased to be corrected. Yeah, maybe 4 years. I thought the CSIS was 1984, if I'm not
And
if
you
I'm not
know that,
mistaken.
and I take it
I'd like to take you to the cabinet meeting of February 13th. So I take it that given the importance of that meeting, you were essentially involved in setting the agenda.
I was advising the Prime Minister on the setting of the agenda for that extraordinary cabinet meeting. It was not a regularly scheduled cabinet meeting.
And you also then were centrally involved in determining the attendance at that meeting. And in particular, you were involved in ensuring that Commissioner Lookey, Deputy Minister Stewart, and Monsieur Vigneault were at that meeting.
I would say that, given the topic, I would have expected those deputies to be invited to support and agency heads to support their minister. I'm just trying to remember whether I actually looked at the attendance list, but I would have expected, and I would have asked that they be in attendance. Yes.
And the invitation would have come from the Privy Council office, correct?
That is correct.
If not from you directly, that's certainly by your ministry.
I have a team that organizes cabinet meetings, that's correct.
And so we've had testimony. Oh, sorry, did
Excuse
you
me
want
first for a second.
Please, please.
Folks, if you want to be kept up to date on what's happening at the Emergency Act inquiry, including my live tweets and some clips and highlights that occurring at the Emergency Act inquiry, by heading over to revolutionnews.ca/Emergency Act Commission. That's revolutionnews.ca/Emergency Act Commission. And of course, here, folks, while you're there, please head over to donorbox.org/Emergency Act Commission. That's donorbox.org/Emergency Act Commission. And of course, here, folks, if you could chip in a buck or two, that will be greatly appreciated, as it will help me cover my travel expenses, including my expenses on food, as bringing you these stories doesn't come for free. Thank you so much.